Just do it as good as you can and do it better the next time. 'Cause if you're waiting on that someday, you'll be waiting the rest of your life. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the blind blogger, Maxwell Ivy. And for those of y'all who know me, you're used to me singing on my intro, but not this song. I did it in honor of my guest today, which you will figure out as we go along. You can find me at theblindblogger.net. That's where this episode will appear. But here lately, I'm doing most of my work in the area of digital accessibility and inclusion. And you can find that website, theaccessibilityadvantage.com. And I do hope you will check out all my work. And I love being able to share my knowledge and experience through writing, speaking, consulting, and podcasting, of course. So today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Adam W. Barney, and he is a transition leadership coach, speaker, and author of Make Your Own Glass Half Full. After 20 plus years in marketing, working with startups and global brands, he now helps founders and leaders become more energized, resilient, and help them to move forward when life and business get messy. Through his writing, speaking, and his podcast, Is Anything Real, which I'll be appearing on soon, y'all. He helps leaders, or he challenges leaders to stop waiting for perfect conditions and start building momentum now. You can find him at adamwbarney.com, and that's Barney. So, Adam, thank you so much for our previous conversations and for coming on the podcast, and welcome to What's Your Excuse?
Thank you, Maxwell. It's great to be here. It's great to hear your voice again, and it's great to be here with anyone who's joined us today.
Well, I hope that we do have people joining us. Due to the limits of my ability to use my technology, I can't tell you if we have people joining us or not, or if they comment or not. And that's a good thing, because I like to focus on my guest and my conversation,
right,
and getting the most out of the conversation for myself, because I know that is what's going to benefit my audience the most.
So, likewise. We're the same in that we're cut from that same cloth.
Yes,
Maxwell.
yes. I will never be a multitasker. If you hear me use the word multitask in a positive vein, you need to call my doctor or something. Because I am a mindfulness in the moment, have to focus on what I'm doing right now, or I will screw it up.
Sure thing. And that then naturally actually leads to probably procrastination to a certain way if you're pulled in multiple directions, I've seen.
Yeah, I've been learning over the last few years the importance of focus. And so, you had over 20 years of experience doing one thing. Now you're leveraging that to help other people be more successful in their work and professional lives. So could you share a little bit about the experiences that led you to have the approach that you have now? Because I'm imagining you had to go through some challenging experiences, some personal conversations to figure this out.
Yeah. That's absolutely a huge piece of it, right? But again, as you mentioned, Max, even though I spent that 20 plus years in those sort of high growth environments, startups, global brands, it was one of those situations where I started to see that everything on paper looked like it was working, but behind the scenes, myself and people around me, I could see were burned out, stuck, or waiting for what maybe they considered to be the right moment. And it never came, and that was something I lived myself too. The turning point for me was really realizing that progress does not come from perfect conditions. It actually comes from managing your energy well enough to take the next step anyway, right? So that's the work I do now, helping founders and leaders stop waiting and start moving again. Because, if you stop waiting and you build momentum and you manage your energy, you've got no excuse that you can use to not make progress forward.
Yeah, what you just said, it sounds very similar to the maxim about courage. People that have courage, they they don't lack fear. They just decide to embrace it and move through it, even though they're afraid.
Right. Well, and that's that. You're exactly right there, right? I don't think anyone gets into this kind of work that both you and I both do because everything went perfectly, right? And for me, it really came from realizing that on the outside, things, again, were looking like they were working. I had the career, I was working with great companies, great teams, but there were moments where I could feel myself stuck more than I wanted to admit. And it's not because I didn't know what to do, but because I was waiting for things, let's say, to feel more certain. And I see that now with so many high performing founders and leaders. They're smart, they're capable. They've obviously got experience, but they hesitate. I think it's actually a natural human condition, no matter where we come from. We wait for the right timing, we wait for the right clarity, we wait for the perfect weather, the perfect conditions. But what I've realized is waiting for certainty is one of the most expensive habits we can have. It feels responsible, but it kills that momentum of just taking action. And again, I was seeing something happen across those teams. People were burning out. They were doing more, trying harder, pushing longer hours, but no one was actually moving forward in the way they wanted. And that's where it really started to click for me. Most people don't have an effort problem. They have an energy problem. And once I started looking at leadership and growth and decision-making through that lens, everything shifted, because then you move to, instead of asking, what should I do next? It's, how do I manage my energy so I can actually follow through on what I already know? And that's what really led me to the work I do now. I mean, it's about using momentum with what you already have, really.
Okay. Was there one specific moment for you personally that led to starting to see things this way?
I mean, there were definitely a few. I will go back in probably my first 10 years of working. It was through the 2008 financial crisis. We had a client that we were working with, and I was in a room where you could tell everyone was grinding so hard and they were just completely unhappy. So that was one of those, rooms that you're in and you realize it's across a team and you wonder, why is this happening? It came down to the leadership. The leadership wasn't being transparent. The leadership wasn't telling the team what the direction was, and people didn't know what to do with that. And it put me in a place of realizing you need to, as a leader, share transparently. You need to help elevate people up, and that's only going to continue to build that momentum. So that was one piece of it, but it's not always that rosy, right? In my corporate career, I was laid off twice, actually. It was never based on performance, I will say, but it was based on things that I couldn't control in terms of economic conditions, or also private equity coming in. So when those situations happened, I pulled up my bootstraps and I emerged out of those to continue to move. And it's what I talk about in the book, with Make Your Own Glass Half Full. I use those tools of optimism and autonomy, which are what energized me to lift out of those challenging situations. But then it's also not just on the professional side, it's on the personal side. We're coming up, we're in 2026 now, of course. It'll be 12 years ago in November, I lost my mom to bulbar onset ALS, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But that shifted my perception and my perspective as well a bit, about what's important and how that energy can amplify.
Yes, it's not uncommon for there to be a health scare, either yours or somebody close to you, along with changes like this. But the thing about working with somebody like you is to try to make these changes before you have those crisis moments that basically throw it in your face to think about these things.
Right. Well, and that's where it is. Perfect conditions. You and I have touched on this before, Maxwell, but nothing is ever perfect in this world, right? There's people talk about the silver bullets that we're looking for, and no one has actually created a silver bullet in the world. It's a fanciful object. So perfect conditions are not what we should shoot for. It's about action and then iteration more than about perfection.
Okay, so help me out just 1 second before we move forward. Could you define iteration for me? That's not in my personal Webster.
Iteration?
Yes.
The fact that for you go and you act, and then you gather feedback and you change based on that feedback. It's using that autonomy that we all have to make those decisions, to make a shift and to iterate over time. I mean, iterate is like, let me give you the example here that actually is really might resonate, because you're going to be joining my podcast soon. When I launched my podcast within the last year, it was originally called Is Anything Real in Paid Advertising? And it actually went back to my corporate career when I first launched. But I realized after having conversations with folks like you, that's not what the mission of the podcast was. So I shifted the name, I iterated to Is Anything Real, and focused it down, not in terms of paid advertising, but to reality first leadership, which is the center of what I like to focus on in my coaching practice. So that's an iteration of taking the original idea and through conversations, feedback, looking inside myself, I made the decision to iterate and shift there. And it's happened across my coaching practice. And that's what I truly mean by iteration. You know, acting, being a person of action, being a human of action is so much more important to just start that momentum forward than waiting for that perfect moment that's never going to ultimately come. And then you just shift based on the feedback and what you learn.
Right. So you've mentioned a couple of things there that I've lived myself and talked to others about. Is that one, we get to decide what our goal is, what success looks like, and two, it's more important to start and evolve as we move forward. And I've done that a lot of times with my first podcast, with writing my first book, with submitting myself for the Amtrak rider thing to go off to New York. A lot of times I just start where I'm at and move forward. In fact, if you want to get a real laugh, look at the video from when I first started doing my podcast with video, and look at how that's changed over time. So, yeah. But you know, the problem is we have way too many people out there in the world who will let's just use podcasting as an example, because we've started there. Sure. There are too many, quote, experts, unquote, out in the world who preach creating the perfect podcast before you even launch, that talk about the amount of, testing going into creating an avatar, or the amount of episodes you need to have in advance before you launch.
Yep.
And all these things, the kind of technology you have to have, all these things really talk people out of starting a podcast who would probably really enjoy having a podcast and maybe even do it well enough to make it something important to them over time, but they never start because of these things out in the world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You just have to take an idea and run with it, and start. That's, but then it's also realizing that you're going to just have to change as you move forward, right? Launch a podcast, take that. I mean, if you even go back to my earliest episodes of the previous name of my podcast, you're going to see I stumble. I don't know what to say. The guests aren't the people maybe that I'm working towards anymore. And it just doesn't, you get better through practice, right? Think about it's a stereotypical, way to talk about it, but the first time you do anything is so much harder. And then when you do it with repetition and consistency, it becomes so much easier.
This is all true. I remember speaking at PodFest, and my topic was overcoming obstacles, facing fear, and finally launching your podcast. And I followed Dave Jackson to the mic, who's like the king of launching podcasts.
Right.
And my first comment to the audience was, okay, you've spent the last couple hours learning how to launch the ideal podcast. I'm going to tell you that from my point of view, the best way to be good at podcasting is to be bad at it for a while.
Seriously, I think I mean, it's like anything. You have to gain the perspective of not understanding, right? I was in my corporate career. I loved the people around me who weren't the same as me. The people who look different than me have a different background, set of experiences. We then complement each other together. That's the way our brains work, but naturally we look for that perfection.
Or we at least look for similarity and symmetry.
Right. And who needs not to make a terrible blind blogger joke, but who needs symmetry when you can't even see it, right?
This is true. As I often tell people, I feel like I meet a better class of people because I can't see any of them first.
Well, it's one of those things that talks like dropping the judgment, right? Yeah. You drop the judgment when your other senses also probably rise, Maxwell, right? You can pick up based on tone of voice and the words people select to use more than you can if you could actually see their face. You're not distracted by that.
Yeah, this is true. There's lots of great psychological research on how little time we spend making judgments and how much of our judgment is influenced by the physical appearance of what we are judging. So, the version that I actually share of that, what I just told you that was kind of funny is, I meet the people I expect to meet, and I try to live by that. So
that's beautiful.
All right, so we both established that we're the kind of people who will just start where we are and move forward, learn, adjust, and either decide to keep doing something or decide that something doesn't suit us. So have you figured out any way to communicate this to others? Because I struggle, and many people I talk to feel like it's something you either have or you don't have, and I disagree, because my opinion is if it was something like that, there'd be no reason for anybody to ever watch another podcast.
Ooh, that's a heavy one. That's actually a heavy one to get through because, I mean, there are ways to do it, but you have to meet people where they are, right? We were just kind of talking about that, actually.
Yes.
But I had to pause here because that's, not just a practical challenge. It's a philosophical question, right?
Yes.
I actually agree with you. And I don't think it's something you either have or you don't, though. I think what people are really seeing when they say that is someone who has built a relationship with action over time. From the outside, it looks like confidence, but from the inside, it usually starts as discomfort. And if you work through that discomfort, so the way I try to communicate it with people is actually really simple. You don't need confidence to start. You need a willingness to be uncomfortable for a little while. That's a very different thing. I know a lot of people who've built speaking careers after forcing themselves to go to an improv comedy class, right?
Yeah, I've heard that.
You launched this podcast today with a musical entry point. That probably felt uncomfortable the first 1, 5, 15 times you did it, but it helps to build that confidence, and that confidence shows up after you've done whatever the thing is a few times. It's not the prerequisite. It's actually the result.
Right. And it's still uncomfortable because when I was in junior high school, when my vision was changing and my voice was changing, I was told not to sing. And I didn't sing for many years until I needed an intro for a video and decided to sing. And this is like over 20 years of this is over 20 years of only singing where nobody could hear me sing, and
right.
And having my ears alert to make sure somebody wasn't sneaking up on me while I was singing. And finally did the intro for a video. I needed something for part of my intro, and I did it, and people liked it. And if you look at my YouTube stats from that year, people liked my singing more than they liked my talking, which and they encouraged me to do more. I found a song I liked by Luke Combs, but I didn't like his chorus, so I rewrote some of the words to his chorus and sang that. And then somebody challenged me to write my own song, and that led to if you don't ask, what's your excuse? And now, don't wait on someday, the bit I was doing before. But because of the background, it will always be uncomfortable. But see, that's the really cool thing, because it's the one thing I do that reminds people, that gives them evidence that I still walk my talk after all these years of doing this stuff.
Well, and then I think the second piece of it that I would say Maxwell weaves into it, you know, after you get to that first part, it's putting it in a structure. You know, otherwise it just feels like a advice, or it doesn't solidify it, right? So, you know, I actually usually say, if you're stuck, ask yourself 3 questions. You know, first, what's one thing you already know you should be doing, right? You know, it doesn't need to be 10 things, just one. The second is, what's actually stopping you, right? Just acting is hard, but is lack of clarity stopping? Is it lack of energy? Is it simply fear? Usually those are the 3 triggers that I say. And then the third is, what's the smallest version of the action you can take today? It's not the perfect version. Again, it's the smallest version, because what I've found is that people don't need more information. They just need the evidence that they can move. And the only way you build that evidence is by taking action and seeing that nothing breaks.
Yeah. And one thing I've learned over the years of being somebody who inspires others is that very smallest step that they can take is often the scariest one that they will ever take, assuming they continue to move forward.
Right. Exactly. It can be hugely fearful. So when someone says to me, I don't have that in me, what I actually usually hear is, I just haven't built enough proof yet. And that's absolutely something that you can build off of and build from. And honestly, Max, I think what you said earlier about being bad at something for a while, that's actually the unlock. Because if you can accept that phase, you're already ahead of most people who don't act and move forward.
Right. Well, part of this goes back to being a carnival owner and working with my dad for all those years. And when things got tough, when we would find a way to through, he would always say, Maxie, what did we have a choice? And so I find that once I decide I want to do something, then I go into that place where, you know, how can I manage to get from here to where I want to go? And then it really, you know, it doesn't matter how uncomfortable those things make me. I will usually find a way to do them. However, in a little bit, I'd like you to speak to what I feel like what I've learned is my challenge, because of who I am.
Right.
Is getting to the point where you are really good at starting things, but you then have to start telling yourself not to start things.
Like picking too many things? Is that where you're going?
Yeah. You know,
keep going there for a second.
He's easily distracted, having to work hard to focus on just a few things, or even getting down to focusing on just one thing. So, because one of the downsides to trying many things and being at least partially successful at them is you build up this momentum you're talking about, that has you believing you can do pretty much anything you want to do.
Right. Well, and that's where, I mean, if you want to talk about on a tactical day-to-day basis, you know, start tomorrow, start with a to-do list that doesn't have 15 things on it. Keep it at 1, 2, 3 things each day so that you can truly focus down. But that's a really important distinction. You know, what you described, I don't view it actually as a weakness. because, everyone listening is a human. It's actually a strength that's just gone a little unbounded, and the ability to start, to move, to not wait, that's rare. But when that isn't paired with some structure, it turns into, I guess, what I would call fragmentation.
Okay.
So the shift there is, it's not about stopping yourself from starting things. It's being intentional about what earns your energy. And a simple way to think about it from my perspective is, instead of asking, can I do this, or do I want to do this, you ask, does this move me forward to the 1-2 things I said that matter most right now? Because, most people, well, not most people, lots of people don't have a motivation problem. There's a prioritization problem.
Right. Okay. So, y'all, I'm speaking with Adam Barney. He's a transition leadership coach, and his primary thing is helping founders and leaders become more energized, resilient, so they can move forward even when life and business are challenging. And you can find him at adamwbarney.com, which is NEY. So you mentioned something in there that I'm not really a fan of, but I know I need to be. And that is the S word of structure. So systems is another S word that I don't really care for, but as I get older, I'm less confrontational with either one of those words.
Fair.
The thing I find, and I sometimes worry that I'm making an excuse in this area, is with some of these systems, I find that a lot of the current technology just doesn't allow me to use the same systems everybody else does. So I not only have to find systems, it generally takes me longer to find systems that work for me, given my options.
Right.
So how do we get from fracturization, or whatever that word was?
Fragmentation.
How do we get to creating structure? And I'm going to guess it's probably the same way we build momentum. It's starting with one bit of structure.
But it's doing it. I mean, the accessibility piece is really fascinating to weave into this, Maxwell, because we're in a world that's so inequitable in so many ways, in terms of how we enable people who look different from the standard person out there in the world. So that's something, that finding the right tools is so critically important. But it's not about just like the selective ability to say no in that structure. And I actually know, I agree with you. I don't like structure as the word to use, but I also don't like the word resilience, for instance, right? I think resilience is way misunderstood, way overused. I mean, most systems, for better or for worse, where we are today in the world, are designed for an average user that I actually argue doesn't exist. So,
well, you're not going to get any argument from me on that. There is no normal and there is no average, in my opinion.
Right. Well, so I think about it, when someone says just use this tool or just follow this system, it completely can ignore the reality of how someone actually has to operate day to day. So I think the first shift is this: structure isn't the tool, it's a support for your energy. And once you look at it that way, the question changes from what system should I use to what's the simplest way for me to stay consistent, given how I as an individual actually work. Because I think for you, there are really 2 layers happening at once, right? There's the normal challenge everyone has,
right,
which is focus, prioritization, and follow through. Yeah. And then there's the added layer of accessibility, which means some tools just aren't simply going to work, where they take more time to adapt.
Yes,
but it's painful to have to design your own version of structure, right?
Yes, it is. And I've had to make a change in my own thinking around this recently, as I've become more and more easily frustrated by lack of accessibility. I've had to change my thinking about this, from seeing my complaints as whining and moaning and instead seeing them as legitimate complaints about a lack of accessible tools that force me to have to work harder than everybody else.
Right. And helping to drive what I love to talk a lot about with systemic change and the small drops and how systemic change happens in a positive direction for each individual person in the world. I mean, again, nothing's perfect for anyone in this world, I'll remind, but it's raising awareness, right?
Yes. Yeah. It is raising awareness, but it is tiring.
Right.
And I have a lot of those days where I just go, do I want to actually do it this way today, or do I just want to do it the way I've recently been looking for a better content management system than WordPress, because regardless of what they will say about their platform, I find it less accessible every week. And I have days where I'm like, Max, you used to code HTML pretty much for an unpaid living when you ran your first website in 2007 to 2012. And I have days where I'm like, other people would think I'm crazy, but I almost think it would be simpler to go back to writing lines of code.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you talk about, I hate to talk about AI tools, but you could even make that easier for yourself. But, I think you're at a point, really interesting point with what you just mentioned, Maxwell, where, when people experience friction, especially repeatedly, I think we tend to internalize it. That's the easiest thing to do.
Yes.
Saying maybe this is just me. Maybe I just need to try harder. But what you just described is really recognizing, no, this isn't just me. It's a system that wasn't designed with me in mind. That's a different framework. That's a different lens to look at it from. Yeah. And once you make that shift, it opens up two powerful paths to me at the same time. One is personal, that sticks around. How do I navigate this but still move forward? But the other is that systemic lens where it's thinking, how do I make this easier for the next person? And that's where, I know your work is really powerful, because you're not just adapting, you're also advocating. And those small drops are exactly how change actually happens.
Yeah. Yeah, change, especially with things as filled with inertia as accessibility or the lack of it, it's like it's like the Grand Canyon that happened over millions of years of water continuing to run over a rock. So it doesn't happen quickly, which can also be frustrating. The funny thing is that I realized my internalization, my approach to the lack of accessibility and tools, I realized it by watching my LinkedIn posts. And I noticed that I was more and more negative, that I was writing more and more posts about stuff that didn't work. And then I was like, Max, you're generally one of the more optimistic person most people will ever meet. And you're being and moaning a lot lately. So why is that? And I really just started thinking about it,
Right.
It's gotten to the point where I realize that I have been frustrated by the lack of tools, and that's not me, that's them,
Right. Yeah. And that self-reframing, you have to take a step back, right, and look internally to be able to do that appropriately and to do it valuably. But again, you're advocating here, right? You're advocating for change, and that perception that, well, even though it's difficult, I'm still living. I have this perception that today is the best day that we've had on this earth.
Okay.
Tomorrow is going to be the next best day that we have on this earth. Things are only getting better all the time, at least until that meteorite that just exploded over Ohio turns a little bit bigger, and that's going to happen at some point. But I think we've got a few million years probably until that happens. But it's the world is going to keep turning, and we're just going to keep getting smarter better solutions out there as the earth continues to turn.
Right. So we've established that both of us have been through a lot of life experiences that have helped us to get to this point where we take action, we adjust, we grow, and we evaluate to see where we're going to take these things next. So, is there something you can tell my audience that will? I know you mentioned those three things. Maybe you could restate those three things you mentioned earlier, because I feel like that's going to be one of the more important things we share with them today.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure being here as well today and having this conversation. But, you know, I love that you pulled that back, because this is where really it becomes practical. So, you know, if someone is listening and they're feeling stuck, I would bring it back to those three simple questions. You know, first, what's the one thing you already know you should be doing? Again, it's not 10 things, it's just one. You know, most people listening already know the next step. They're just not taking it.
Mm-hmm.
The second is what's actually stopping you. And I usually break it into those three buckets. Is it clarity? Is it energy? Or is it fear? Because again, if you can't name the real blocker, you can actually address it. Or rather, if you can name the real blocker, you can actually address it. That was a double negative I worked in there, unfortunately. And then the third is,
but at least you caught yourself.
it didn't sound right when it came out. With two young kids in the house, I have to say sometimes I say things to them and the same thing happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but then the third is, what's the smallest version of that action you can take today? And it's not the perfect version, it's not the finished version, it's the smallest version. Because what people really need isn't, again, more information. It's just building that evidence that they can move, and that the world doesn't catch on fire. You don't trip over something. Nothing breaks when you do. And when you take that small step, you start to create that little bit of momentum. It's that little spark of building the fire that starts to play when you're, you know, chiseling two rocks together.
Yeah.
And that momentum makes the next step easier and easier and easier. And that's really how everything we've been talking about today starts to build. So it's truly simple but powerful. One thing, what's stopping you and what's the smallest step? And if you repeat that enough times, you don't just take action once, you become someone who takes action consistently.
Yeah. And you get to a point in your life where once a podcast host told me I was addicted to being uncomfortable. And I told him, no, I was comfortable being uncomfortable because my version sounded more positive.
Right.
You know, well, I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sitting down and talking with me. And I hope that I was able to stay on train long enough for you to cover the things that are obviously important to you. And people should definitely check out the book, Make Your Own Glass Half Full. And do visit his website, adamwbarney.com, and check out what he has to offer. I do appreciate you, Adam. Thank you so much for your time today. And you'll hang around for a few minutes while I do my outro. We'll be done.
Cool. Well, it's been such a pleasure, Maxwell. I really enjoyed being here. You know, again, you know, I like to call myself a transition leadership coach. The thing that's important in that is transition is always happening. The only constant in life is change, right? So there's always going to be some challenge that's out there.
Yeah. And hopefully I didn't get too much coaching for free from you today. So
oh, it's never for free. It's always energy equity that comes back. It relieves some of the energy debt that I've run into sometimes as well.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that right here at the end, because when I sit down to record, whether I am the guest or the host, for at least 30 minutes before I start the recording, during the recording, and then to whatever time I have with the guest or the host after the recording, I am at my most energetic level of the entire day.
It's beautiful.
But as soon as it is over and I have to start moving towards uploading the audio, writing the blog post, etc. It's like somebody pulled all the plugs out of the wall, turned off all the breakers, and called the power company and canceled my electricity. It's and so I've actually been trying to address it. I've been reaching out to more and more of my friends lately to ask them for recommendations for a VA, and I've also reached out to a couple of past guests who are in a position to connect me with an internship program. So I'm working on my fear around how do I find a good VA so that I can get more work done, because it's great recording these conversations and having them on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, but 80% of the audience is going to listen to them. And so if I'm not getting the audio out, I'm not serving them, me, or you.
Right.
And I really do believe I do this to serve you and my audience more so than myself. So I'm working on it. And
I mean, asking for help is one of those best things that we can learn how to do in life also.
Yes. And for those of you who have followed me a while, as he says that, you were probably thinking about my one phrase, and Zach Demopoulos, I'm thinking of you, bro. When you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received. So,
boom.
But you know what's funny is sometimes even though I'm known as the if you don't ask guy, even though I've talked to people about interdependence and asking for help, there are days when I just don't feel like it. So, and I feel like this is the good stuff. This is because people assume me and you are perfect. They assume we know what the heck we're doing. Some of the time, yeah, maybe, but not all of the time. And I feel it's important for people to see moments like we just had, because it really is powerful to let them know that, as you said, transition is constant. We all live with it, deal with it. So thank you again. And I will now do my outro and we'll be done. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me on What's Your Excuse, where I bring on people to help you overcome the excuses that are holding you back, and in some cases, the excuses holding Max back. And you can find this podcast at theblindblogger.net. That's theblindblogger.net. You can find my work in the field of accessibility and inclusion at theaccessibilityadvantage.com. And earlier during this podcast, we did mention podcasting and finding great guests. I find my guests through podmatch.com, which is founded by my good friend and business mentor and client, Alex Sanfilippo, where I am the digital accessibility advisor and have been for 5 years. This is actually my anniversary month. Ooh. And so I hope y'all will check out podmatch.com, and the other links I will put in the show description that lead you to resources for products and services that are not only helpful, but accessible. So I hope y'all will check that out. Until next time, please do take care of yourselves out there. You've got a goal in your heart and a dream you want to chase. And you keep making excuses, thinking you're in the wrong place. Go ahead and do it. No one can run your race. No one's ever won a trophy by saying someday.
Item chooser menu. 150 items StreamYard. Skip to content button. Item chooser menu. 178 1 to 2 items end stream. End stream button. End the stream. And out group set not end stream button. StreamYard.